Hey, Elgrie.
Hey, I know you.
You know me, even though you're not seeing my face.
I can see a picture of your face.
Oh, okay. Look forward to hearing you and unpacking some knowledge here.
I'm gonna share what I can. I'm gonna share what I
All
can.
right. Looking forward to it. Okay, I'll mute myself again, but just want to say hi.
Thanks. All right. Got people connecting. Um, we are just wanting to get more people a chance to log on. We have been waiting anxiously for you all since about 6:50. We wanted to give a chance people to deal with all the different tech issues that come along with Zoom and video calls, and then we will get started in a few minutes, started by Mrs. Teresa Eoff, and then we'll go from there.
All right. People are joining. All right, Elgrie, it's 5:05. Do you want to?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Let's be respectful of people who were able to get here when they got here, and we'll make sure that those who come in, we'll get them caught up.
Okay. All right, so we want to welcome you to our August event, Bridging the Digital Divide. We're so fortunate to have Mr. Elgrie Hurd III to speak to us on this topic, especially during this time. It's so timely. We know school is starting right now, so hopefully educators and students alike can gain a lot of knowledge from this. Just some housekeeping rules. So if everyone can stay on mute, we will have moderators in the chat room. So if you have a question or a comment or you need anything or having technical difficulty, there will be somebody in the chat to help. And also Elgrie is going to be taking Q&A at the end of the session. So we're planning to leave lots of time for that. And yeah, so let's get started. So I'm going to introduce Elgrie to you all. I'm so excited to see him. He moved to Texas, so a number of us are in California, and we're just excited to see his
Where in Texas did he move?
Where are you in Texas now? Dallas, Fort Worth?
I'm in Dallas County.
Oh.
I'm in Dallas County.
Lots of family in Austin.
Great ice cream in Austin.
So Elgrie is originally from Eastern Menlo Park, California. He holds a master's degree from San Jose State University in sociology with an emphasis in sociology of education, but he gained his bachelor's degree from Cal Poly Pomona in sociology. During his studies at San Jose State University and Cal Poly Pomona, he focused on several academic support and student affairs projects, helping students not drop out of school. For over 20 years, Elgrie has worked in education in some capacity. He has served as an adjunct professor, middle school and high school teacher, and student services dean, an upward bound coordinator, and even a consultant staff member for faculty training, student leadership development, tutor training, and overall academic support. He is a faculty member for the Psychology and Sociology departments at the Brookhaven campus of Dallas College, formerly the Dallas Community College District. Elgrie is an adjunct faculty member for Criswell College, Messenger College, Parker University, Strayer University, and Tarrant County College. So he's super busy. He also serves as a contributing editor for numerous psychology and sociology textbooks. His efforts at previous institutions helped them exceed expectations in academic support and student support services by programmatic accrediting bodies. In his many roles, he has worked diligently to address college readiness, success needs of at-risk high school students, college students, and even parents and guardians of students. Over the last 13 years, Elgrie has traveled around the country educating educators and parents about the power of culturally relevant education. He specializes in educational consulting, diversity and inclusion, motivational speaking, and organizational program evaluation. As it relates to serving the community, Elgrie is the Secretary for Communities in Schools, Dallas Region Leadership Council, an influencer for the online women's networking empowerment site on mogul.com. And he is also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, initiated at the Iota Psi chapter of Cal Poly Pomona. Elgrie is pursuing his doctorate degree in psychology with an emphasis in industrial organizational psychology, and his goal is to use his studies to develop strategies to enhance emotional intelligence, awareness of students at all levels of education. So he currently resides in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas with his wife Althea and their 4 children. And just a fun fact, he used to travel all around the country teaching parents and educators how to use hip hop to help students master school content. So thank you, Elgrie, for joining us, and we're excited to hear from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity. Cal Poly did a great, gave me a great experience in helping me. And so I wanted to give a chance to give back. And so when I was reached out to, thought it was a great opportunity. And with all that we have going on, if I can give my information to help other people, I'm definitely for it. I loved my experience at Cal Poly, regardless of the different challenges I had there. It wasn't a perfect experience. I don't think any college is. It definitely has challenges, but the pros outweigh the cons, and it definitely shaped my viewpoint of wanting to be active in my community and to learn by doing. And my kids, who have only one of them has ever actually been to Cal Poly Pomona, all know about the university because it's where I met my partner in crime, my spouse, and it's a lot of things that influenced me happened there at Cal Poly Pomona. So today it is 3 parts. We're doing stuff to empower educators, whether you're at the college level, whether in the K-12 system. We want to do some stuff for students, whether you're a college student or a K-12 student. And we want to talk about those who are allies, allies of those students, whether it's high school or college, how you can, or K-12, how you can be there for those individuals, your students, while they're trying to navigate these uncharted territory, which is this digital learning in the fall. We got a sample version of it in the spring. There were a lot of different challenges. A lot of schools are making really great strides in trying to make it more student-centered and making sure that teachers have what they need to be able to support the students. And some people don't have the information they need. And so the goal is to equip you all. So that being said, if I'm gonna show you all kind of the learning outcomes, I'm a big fan of knowing what our goals are before we get started. So I'm not just winging it, just throwing off whatever comes up to my head. So if you want to go ahead and put the slide up, we'll go ahead and get started. And then I'll talk a little more about me during the presentation, but I want to be mindful. For those who are coming in, we will fill you in as needed. If you miss something, I want to encourage you all, because there's so many of y'all, encourage you to put your information in the chat box, and so that the moderators will let me know so I can respond to those in real time. Some of those I won't respond to during this session, but we will do what we can to make sure that if we don't respond for it during the session, will respond to it afterwards, whether it's at the end or either me typing up my responses and sending them to the Alumni Association, then forwarding out to those people who registered for the session. All right, so closing the pandemic digital divide. Again, my name is Elgrie Hurd III. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. I'm a sociologist. I do both of those things. At Cal Poly Pomona, the psychology and sociology department work together, and those were important things that helped me be able to be here with you all today. So we go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right. There we go. Perfect. So, got two parts of the outcomes I want to go over with you all. One is I want to identify 2 or 3 strategies for educators to communicate with students efficiently. A lot of the things I'll be sharing you are things I've been reading about, and also my experiences as an educator and some other identities that I've had in navigating through this new terrain. Also want to identify 2 or 3 self-advocating best practices for students during shelter in place. During this pandemic, many students are asked to do their work remotely. Some students will be able to return to their university campus or college campus if they're at a college level. Some won't. And so during this thing, there's some things that are really important to make sure that students are advocating for themselves. Yes, it's great to have other people advocate for you, but you want to make sure that you can be your biggest fan, especially during this pandemic. All right. Second, going on to the second set of learning outcomes. We want to talk about some teaching strategies and learning for a virtual educational environment. And so when I say teaching and learning, so on the teaching side, things that can be done for the educators. On the learning side, things that can be done for students and allies of students, whether it's a parent or guardian, to help it be a collaborative effort. Because realistically, the only way that this is going to work during this pandemic as relates to learning is it's got to be a collaborative. It's got to be a collaborative effort. It's got to be everyone involved. So definitely want to make sure we explore all these 3 areas. Right? So because there's so much that we can cover, realistically, everything cannot be covered. One thing that I want to stress is since we're on a limited time, we won't be able to go deep diving as it relates to students who have any type of ADA American Disabilities Act accommodations. I think if that's something that you're inquiring for, you want information for, then I want to encourage you to, at the end of it, I'll have my contact information to reach out so I can respond to you directly online, offline, because realistically, when we're talking about accommodations, that's a whole different presentation that we need to do. I do think it's important that parents or allies of students and students know how to navigate around accommodations during the pandemic. I've had the privilege of being an ADA coordinator at numerous institutions I've worked for. And so it's really important that I mention that ADA accommodations are important, and to highlight them well. This isn't the forum for us to deep dive. I am available to touch base offline to be able to offer you some feedback and some ideas on how to navigate through that. So just want to make sure that we put that out there from the beginning. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. So why I'm here. I'm here for a bunch of different reasons. One, because I'm an alum of Cal Poly Pomona. And while I was at Cal Poly Pomona, people poured into me. Upperclassmen poured into me, alums poured into me, faculty, staff, administrators poured into me, and became an extended family for me. And that was helpful because, as I mentioned earlier, Cal Poly Pomona is not perfect. It has historically had its different challenges, but the pros outweigh the cons in my experience. And one thing I learned there was to pay it forward. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm also here because I'm a parent. I am navigating through this pandemic like many of you all, if you are parents, and trying to see what's going on. So just curious if people can kind of type into the chat bar, those who are parents, what are the grade levels of your students? So let's see what we see here. All right, I got student parent. Okay. Second and third grade, elementary. Okay. College freshmen, welcome to college. 10th and 12th grade. Okay. Second grade, first year college parents. I know for the college parents, this is a very interesting time. This wasn't part of the preparation package that you were trying to give your student. First year college parent, high school, senior and junior. Wow. 6th and 8th grade, middle school, my favorite grades to teach. Okay. Okay. So thank you for those people. If you want to share what grades your students are, that's helpful. If you want to share what year, if you're a student yourself, what year you are as relates to your college experience. But one reason is because I am a parent. I have a 13-year-old who is going into the 8th grade. I have an 11-year-old who's going to the 5th grade. I have a 9-year-old going to the 4th grade. And I have a 4-year-old who just terrorizes us. But he does it with as best he can with kindness, but sometimes it doesn't work out. So as a parent, I've had to navigate through this as well. For me, I've had the privilege of homeschooling prior to having my kids in public school. My wife and I, we were homeschoolers for 6 years before putting our kids in public school this past year. And then they ended up coming back home anyway. So that was helpful for us to navigate through some things because we had a successful 6 years in homeschooling. Another reason why I am here is because I'm an educator. I have had the privilege of teaching as young as pre-K all the way to graduate school, taught middle school, high school, taught all those different levels. And I think it's important that educators share with other educators. That's how I have learned. Other educators have helped me along the way. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing that. Another reason is because you don't know what you don't know. That's one thing that I've noticed. Sometimes you don't know that there's another idea out there because you've never thought of it. No one brought it to your attention. And so my goal is to be able to do that. So with those three things, that's why I'm pushing forward. Now, my question for you all, I said why I am here. What I'd like you to put in the Zoom chat is, why are you all here? Okay. So we got a columnist. All right, I'm gonna write her here. Okay. Okay. Partner is also an educator. Okay. 3rd grade teacher. I salute you. You are awesome. A museum educator. That is fancy. That is awesome. Okay. Technology challenge, high school math teacher, lifelong learner. Okay. Learn how to support my students. That's awesome. Career counselor at CPP. The career counselors at CPP are awesome. An HR professional. Okay. Navigating with employees. Yes, if you're HR, having to deal with your employees and how to support them can be a challenge. Adjunct instructor. All right. CPP student, here to learn information to help my student during this pandemic. 1st generation college student. I'm a grandmother of 10 and need to support them. You are an awesome grandma of 10. You need to reword that. Okay. I'm a graduate of public health, Western University. Okay. Exit founder, alum, early career. Okay. CNA. Wow. Retired educator, here to support. We always love that. Okay. Awesome. And with that being said, continue to put in the chat. The goal is to be able to speak about these things. Now, in an hour and a half, we're not going to cover everything. It's not possible. And as the world keeps changing, more things will come up. Regardless of things changing, there are some best practices that I want to share with you all as we go through these things. So thank you for sharing and continue. Special ed, high school, math teacher. All right. Notice your students of color were struggling more than others. And we're going to talk about some of those things. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. What the pandemic has taught us. So one thing that I want to talk about with you all is the idea that I heard something from, his name was Dylan Moran. He's a digital creator. and he has a TED Talk. You can Google empathy is not an endorsement. And before we get started and I talk about what the pandemic has taught some of us, from my point of view, I would like you to put in the chat box what you think that means to you when I say empathy is not an endorsement. So if you can put in the chat box what you think that means, and then I'll kind of tie that into the conversation and how that relates to what we're covering today. So when you hear the phrase empathy is not an endorsement, what does that mean to you all? Okay, actions speak larger than words. Okay. Thank you for being the first to share. You hear that when you hear the phrase empathy is not an endorsement, you're not given a pass on shortcomings because of emotions. Okay. All right. Perhaps someone holds back because they think the other will take advantage. Empathy is not an endorsement means to have unity and to share loving acts of kindness by empowering and educating communities. Empathizing doesn't mean you have to agree. Okay. Thank you all for sharing and continue to share. You know, when you hear that, what does that mean to you? Empathy is not an endorsement. Just because I can feel your pain or know your situation does not mean I agree with your decisions or how you're handling it. Yes, all the things that you all have shared is what I was thinking of when I hear empathy is not an endorsement. And the reason why I feel it's important when we're talking about a pandemic is you don't have to agree with how someone handles this pandemic. You do have to be willing to understand that how you handle it isn't going to be how everyone else handles it. And so we talk about the different things the pandemic has taught me. It's taught me that the digital divide is real. I live in Dallas County, where you have a large portion of the population that does not have access to high-speed internet. Well, how does that work where everyone's going digital to do their work? That makes it a challenge. And this includes not just students. We're talking about educators. Some educators depend on their work internet, and they get all their work done while at work. And now having to find their own internet can be a challenge. And depending on where you live, everyone's internet speed is not the same. And so those are important things for us to keep in mind, that what works for some isn't going to work for everyone else. What the digital divide has taught me during this pandemic is everyone doesn't have a computer. I had students who were in high school. I teach dual credit classes that are high school students taking college courses, and I also teach traditional college courses. And I had students, high school and who were on their own, who were trying to do assignments with their cell phone. And realistically, writing a term paper, you're not going to get the best grade that you want to get doing it on a smartphone. And everyone's smartphone isn't the same. Some people have iPhones from 2007. Some people have brand new phones, all these different things. You can have a brand new phone, but you don't have good internet service. So that can be a challenge. Everyone doesn't have a computer. Some people have a Chromebook. A Chromebook can be useful. In some ways, it can be challenging in the academic world. In a college setting, Chromebooks can be limiting in some ways. Everyone doesn't necessarily have a laptop or a computer. So what does that do when you have multiple people in your house and there's only one computer? And this is why I talked about empathy is not an endorsement. No one was prepared for a pandemic. And some people will make decisions that you may not agree with. I had students that said, Professor H, it's either do your work online or go find a job, because my parent lost their job during the pandemic. And so I have to work. I can't tell a student, hey, you need to finish the assignments. Your grade is important. Your grade is important. But keeping the lights on and putting food in your belly is really important. And there's a basic need. I don't want a student to have to choose between that. But that's what some students, that's what some educators are having to navigate through. So keeping that in mind, It's also taught, and then there's the 4-year-old. It's also taught that, you need to go back downstairs, buddy. And it's taught you that your children don't care, even when you're doing a presentation, about things that matter to other people. Other things the pandemic has taught us is that, again, some people have to choose between work and school. Some people have to choose between being babysitters and unofficial parents versus their schoolwork. These are some of the challenges people are navigating through, and everyone is stressed. There are some people who are asked to teach with technology, but don't know how to use technology that well. And some people aren't getting the support to navigate and do that. So I talk about empathy is not an endorsement. It doesn't mean that empathy isn't important. Empathy is very important. Because if we're going to move forward, educators, we have to have some empathy for our students. Students, we have to have empathy for our educators. Parents, allies of students, you have to have empathy for the students, for the educators, and for yourself. And the educators and students have to have some empathy for the allies of the students. There has to be this circle of everyone looking out for each other. That's really what it's going to take for us to move forward. So I want to talk about that because I think that's important to get some context. I get people are stressed, and people will handle stresses in different ways. The hope is that we give you some things that are best practices that you can take away to help you navigate through some things. All right, next slide, Anna, please. All right, so one of the things I want to stress is the idea for educators. So again, we're gonna do this in 3 parts. We're gonna do it with the educators, then we're gonna do it with the students, and we're gonna do it with the allies. For the educators, all about KISS. Now, some of you have learned that KISS means keep it simple, stupid. I like to stay away from negative terms, especially in the educational context. So my version of KISS is keep it simple, scholars. Keep it simple, students. So one is being consistent, and that's hard during a pandemic. So I know my first bullet may seem like a lot, and it's important. So what I didn't put on the slide, but I share with you is be consistent as often as you can. Because we got to have empathy. Sometimes you can't get it, you can't post it at the exact same time. But if you can post it the same day, and if you can let students know, I'll be posting it on this day. And if you have the ability to give a specific time, then by all means do that. But if you can't, try to send out things the same day. Same time would be ideal. Doesn't always work out that way. Ideally, you want to have multiple ways to communicate. Now, one of the ways to be more efficient in your conversations with students and with allies of the students for the educator side is to have kind of a frequent asked questions, a FAQ discussion board forum. In Blackboard, you will get the opportunity, you can create a discussion board and you can ask people to subscribe to that discussion board forum. When you do that, every time someone replies to something, an email notification is sent out to whatever email they have attached to Blackboard. So a good way to do that is essentially have a list of questions, of commonly asked questions about your class, and allowing students to reply to those but not create additional threads. And that way you don't get a whole bunch of additional random questions. What that does is if you're applying to questions that relate to the assignment, you post it in one location. And when you respond, everyone can see it, opposed to having to send an email to every single student that replies asking you the same question about the same thing. That's something for me that's been really helpful because I'll often encourage people to say, please post in the discussion board and I'll respond there because other students will probably have a similar question. Simple things like, when is the assignment due? How do I upload this? Those are questions that other people probably have but aren't ready to ask. So I want to encourage people to do that. Another thing that you want to think about, if you don't have Blackboard, you have something like Google Classroom. Google Classroom also gives you a chance to create a discussion board. And with there, you can create a location that says, here's a place to ask frequently asked questions. And that's where you will direct if you are dealing with K-12, parents or the students to write down their questions there, and you'll respond there, post responding to each individual via email. That can save you some things. Reality is, I would love for all students to check emails. Everyone doesn't check emails. And so having an additional thing, I don't necessarily think you need to have 3 or 4 ways to communicate, but if you're going to use discussion board as one avenue, rather than using email, maybe consider something like the Remind Me app. The Remind app is essentially a way to send out group messages, a way for them to respond to you individually through an app, not through an email. Allows you to send out messages because most people who sign up for Remind will typically be tied to their cell phone. So it's dealing with a lot of students who are very inclined to have their cell phone wherever they go. Uh-oh, someone's sound disappeared. Anyone else having that problem? Don't know. Well, all right. Make sure.
Sounds good on my end.
Okay. All right. Linda, are you able to hear us now? All right. Okay. All right. So we'll touch base and make sure that you're still good, because I definitely want everyone to be able to hear. We're going to continue rolling on. So Remind is another way to do that. If you're not really into doing a whole bunch of apps, I want to encourage you some different things that you can do. But those are some ways to get started. Someone suggesting to refresh and okay, Linda, you're good. Great. So having multiple ways, more than one way. And that's not so that students can bombard you, because in the next slide, we'll talk about some things on how you can stop the bombardment of information from students. But having multiple ways is a good way to communicate with students. One of the other things I want to say about keeping it simple is less is more. I, as an educator, have learned that if I send out too many messages during this pandemic, it stressed out my students. And those students who were vocal and confident enough gave me that feedback. As a parent of students, I got some emails that were 2-3 pages long every day from one teacher, and then from other teachers as well. It was too much. I had essentially about 15 emails from 15 different teachers, and they were long. And so going back to this idea of empathy, asking yourself, would you want to read if someone sent you all of that? So by less is more, keeping it simple. Using some email etiquette, talking about maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 bullets at the most, or shortened to the point. If you can't do all that, then maybe it's too much. You might have to save it for the following week. Again, the idea is you want to share information. Parents love that, students like that. But if you share too much, it's not getting read. So less is more. So when I send out messages, typically on Sunday evening, Sunday evening or Monday morning, and I tell students you'll get a message either between Sunday evening, Monday morning. I tell them at the beginning of the semester, and I remind them throughout the semester when I send out my weekly messages, and it'll have 3 or 4 bullet points. What's going on, what I expect from what we're covering, and then moving on. Having too much can really be overwhelming, because if you're having to read through that, then that student has questions, then they have to ask you. And so instead of doing the work that you assigned them to do, they're trying to play catch up with the email and getting lost in translation. So definitely want to encourage that. And I also want to say, when we talk about being consistent, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like on the next slide. So in part 2 for the educators, keeping it simple, assume nothing about your students, about their ability and what they can do. That might sound over the top, but I was teaching a semester class. It started in January. Our district went to a shelter-in-place mode where everything was remote and online, and we had a paper that was due. And typically, my students upload in Blackboard. Well, I had some students who didn't know how to upload the assignment in Blackboard. And that was a requirement to be able to submit even before the pandemic. And so I had to send out a YouTube video on how to upload into Blackboard. So whether you're dealing with pre-K, college, high school, middle school, elementary, you really want to make sure that you're providing resources for them to be able to access the things that you want to. So don't assume that they know how. You might want to verify to make sure that they have that. You want to have clear expectations. I talked about in the previous slide having multiple ways to communicate with the individuals of your students. At the same time, you need to have clear expectations. For me, I let students know repeatedly throughout the semester that I'm available to be contacted via phone between 8:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. If you reach out to me on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're probably not going to hear from me until Monday. And I've, for the most part, I've had as many as 500 students. During the spring semester, I had about 300 students. And I only had about 2 or 3 students where I had to remind them. And having clear expectations. Clear expectations also isn't just in the form of communication, it's also in the rubric. If students know what you expect of them and it's clearly laid out, they're not bugging you every 5 minutes with an email or a text message asking you questions. So if you're already using rubrics, awesome. I encourage you to make those rubrics accessible. So that way students know and you're liable to get a better product to the students. If you're not using rubrics, I would encourage you to do that. It helps streamline a lot of things. It helps students know what they need to get done. And as it relates to going through and grading things, it helps you be consistent. So, excuse me. If you're already using rubrics, continue to use those. Make sure students can see them. If you're not using rubrics, I would encourage you to utilize those. If you teach in the K-12 system, you most likely use rubrics already. If you're in a college setting, you know, some faculty I know use rubrics, some don't. I've been using rubrics since I've been teaching. I learned that from being a middle school teacher. It's been a blessing in the high school and in the college and graduate school setting as well, because students know what to expect and it's clearly laid out. Encouraging for educators to be flexible with the access to content that students have to master or have to submit to you. If something's due, ideally maybe breaking it down into smaller parts. Especially we're talking about the K-12 system, breaking it down into smaller parts. That way students can do it in chunks. Because again, typically they're in class with you, but now they're dealing with other things that have nothing to do with class. They're dealing with a whole bunch of other things that can be a distraction. So allowing students to access things early, making sure things are clear on the syllabus, making sure students are able to, if they want to submit things early, that they can, making sure, ideally for me, flexible access to content means ideally trying to put your assignments that are due near the end of the week. Have them due on a Friday or a Saturday and have them due consistently, opposed to in the middle of the week. And that way students know that. That's a great way for students to know, hey, I've got till the end of the week to get this done. Now, doesn't mean the students aren't going to do the work, but by giving them the extra time and having to do it at the end of the week, it again increases the likelihood more students are going to be able to complete the work. Flexibility to the access means that ideally you're not requiring all students to have to be in class at real time. So if your class is at 11 a.m., if what you did at 11 a.m. is also available at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that would be great. Because what if that student has a work schedule where they can't be there at that time? I know it's the class I signed up for, but as many of you who have worked before outside of education, your work schedule isn't always going to be what you signed up for it to be. So having clear expectations helps, and having flexible content where you can access it at various times is great. Just because you post something, ideally don't take it down. Once you post it, leave it available because it may help a student to be able to backtrack because they may need it for a reference point later. So I've covered 2 parts as it relates to educators. I just want to go ahead and take a pause for a second and see what questions does anyone have as it relates on the educator side. I don't want to wait till the end to be asking questions for the for educators. So if you're still having audio problems, you might want to refresh. Someone suggested refresh. But I'm curious for those who are educators on this call, what are some things that you would like to see that you have questions about? So I'm looking to see if there are any. There may not be. What kind of feedback have you received? What kind of feedback have you received from your students on the frequently asked question page you set up for the class? Thank you for that question, Brent. A couple of different things. One, some feedback I got, I've never seen this before. That was one feedback. Once students got used to it, it was helpful because I wasn't the only one responding. Once students got used to that forum, students started helping other students, and that was really helpful. So it wasn't just me, it became a community effort to share information. And so what that did was it eliminated a lot of emails on my end. It eliminated a lot of emails on the students' end, and eventually, you know, they know when they post something, they will get a response from me with usually the same day, if not the following morning. So it became a great way to clarify on things. Let me see, there's some more questions up here. A list of available learning platforms. So we're talking about how you can do it. You can do this on Blackboard. You can do this on Canvas. There's a discussion board application option on Canvas, LoudCloud, Google Classroom. So each one you typically will have a discussion board. They won't all necessarily let you subscribe, but you can just tell people to check that subscription daily. I assume that my students were tech savvy since they were always on their phone, but most of them have never even used email. Yes, while many students are hip with the fancy phones, they aren't necessarily using all the things smartphone has to offer. I've had the privilege of being a student success coach remotely for some students who were going to college for the first time, and they had a smartphone and never utilized the calendar. So sometimes it's providing links. And so one thing that I provided is a resource page and has links on, you know, how to use a calendar, how to backwards plan. Because I can't spend time with each student, but having links where they can go on their own has been a great tool to help students become more tech savvy and utilize things. So do you find that educators are resisting digital transformation, the digital transformation accelerated by COVID? Yes and no. I do think some people resist digital transformation. I don't think something because they don't want to do it. I think it's often because they're overwhelmed with how much they have to do so fast. And so that resistance becomes really strong when they don't have a good support system. So I've got some colleagues that have been instructors for 40 years. They had never taught an online class. That was really a challenge for them. And the reason why they were able to be successful was their colleagues, myself included, we worked with them and shared some things and worked with them and met them where they were. So I think the resistance you get is when people are not supported well. When you say, oh, go teach an online class, but that person doesn't have the tools to do it. So I think that's where I see a lot of resistance. And sometimes people don't want to change, but I think that's a small majority. People who are tech savvy resistant are typically because they don't feel confident and they don't have the resources. Do you find, how do we approach parents about offering free resources? So when talking to, so on the educator side, most districts in the K-12 system are telling educators and parents of resources. So at the beginning of the semester, if you know of things that are internet providers are providing discounted internet service, you may want to provide some, like a page of things that they can utilize. Because sometimes they don't know, even though they're getting emails, because again, their life is not school. So there's other things that are going on. And so when I talk about free services, discount services, I try to make sure, yes, there are emails, but when I'm talking about my weekly bullet points, I may mention like, you know, there is free produce available for people on this day at this location. Another example may be mentioning to students of things they can go to and mentioning it on maybe a couple of items at a time, because giving too much resources can overwhelm people. So that's what I have utilized. So if you think of more questions, again, put them in the chat, because again, I don't want this to be just me talking. I also want to be talking based on the feedback that you all are giving. So thank you for those who have submitted responses thus far. I appreciate it. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. So we go from the educators to the students. And students matter. I have a job because of students. And I'm always a big fan of students being able to empower themselves. And so on the student side, if you're a student, whether you're in the K-12 system, whether you're in college, you have to know how to advocate for yourself. And what that means is you need to make sure the things that are going to help you be successful that you need from instructors, that you reach out and ask for. If instructions are not clear, then being willing to share that information and saying, I'm not sure about what this is. Can you give me more information about that? Being able to say, hey, is it possible to have access to this particular thing? Where do you think I should go to for this resource? Ask those questions. Also, knowing the resources that are available to you on campus, whether it's, if you gotta do research papers, learning how to utilize the college, university, library remotely is a big deal. If you're in a K-12 setting, knowing that oftentimes Chromebooks or laptops are going to be available to you and there are forms that you need to fill out. And even if you miss deadlines, you can still most likely get it because they want to make sure you have what you need. And so that may be reaching out to counselors. In the K-12 setting, reaching out to the high school, the assistant principals or the counselors in the K-12 system. If you're talking about the college level, Division of Student Affairs at Cal Pomona, you're talking about career services, you're talking about the tutoring, you're talking about the cultural centers, you're talking about the library, you're talking about the disability center, you're talking about all these different places that can be resources to you. And making sure that you touch base with those because they may be able to tell you how to get additional scholarship money so that you can focus on school instead of having to work. They may know of discounted housing. They may discounted cell phone services, internet services, and it's about reaching out. On the college level, it's reaching out to your advisors. All right, a comment here. Someone said, one of the most useful skills I learned in school was to advocate for myself. It took my parents and some trusted teachers and counselors to show me the way until I found my own voice. Once I found it, it was one of my most powerful tools. Thank you for sharing. You have to be, if you're a student on this Zoom, have to be the biggest fan for your success. Because no one knows all the things you're going on. And now that we are all remote, we are more disconnected than ever before. So it's really important for you to make sure that you are reaching out. And if that's difficult for you, that's fine. It'll come in time, but you gotta start somewhere at some point. So I want to encourage you to do that. The last part about students is being proactive and discreetly vulnerable. Proactive, you can't wait till last minute. If something's due at 11 o'clock at night, don't reach out to your instructors at 11 o'clock at night. Being willing to reach out a day before something's due, you'll get more teachers, whether it's K-12 or in the college setting, that are willing to be more flexible with you. And discreetly vulnerable means sharing that you have something going on, but you don't have to give all the details. It may be, I'm having some internet connections challenges at home. May I have more time? I have to watch some family members. You don't necessarily have to go in details as to why you're watching family members, but maybe you have to watch a little person. And that person requires having access to the laptop or the computer that you're using. Those are things that are important to share because the instructors don't know what they don't know. So it's really important for you to share that information. Again, you don't have to share all the details, but if there's a hiccup with you getting your work done, you've got to be willing to give out that information. I had a student during the pandemic that had their sibling send me a message. The message from the sibling said, Professor H, I am not one of your students. I am a sibling of one of your students, and my sibling has been hospitalized. Come to find out that student had tried to take his own life. And those are some of the things. Now, I didn't know that initially. The students had to disclose that when they provided documentation saying this person was hospitalized and was unable to do anything. But if you've got a need, you don't know how that faculty or that instructor can support you in that. And that does require trust. But there are some benefits to being vulnerable, because as it relates to this pandemic, being on your own and doing everything by yourself does not guarantee you success. So I want to encourage you to be proactive and be discreet about what you share. You can share about, I'm dealing with some challenges, what's the protocol if I need more time. And that's more likely to get support from your teacher if you're asking in advance. So remember that you have a voice. Start learning about the resources. If you're in K-12, learning about these resources will help you in college. In college, this is really important. So if you haven't learned about those, then start learning about them. If you're at Cal Poly Pomona, go to the Division of Student Affairs website, and you'll start listing a lot of the student services that are available to you. Take advantage of them. They're there for you. They're paid for by your tuition and fees, so take advantage of them. All right, next slide, please. All right, students have allies. So this is for those who are in the K-12 setting. If you are a parent or a guardian or a grandparent, I know there's someone on here who is a grandparent of 10 and trying to support all 10, which makes you a rock star from my perspective. If you are in this, then you want to leverage your ability as an ally, and you want to ask for rubrics. Ask for how grading is going to work out, because that's important. Because many people who are going to be remote learning with their students, teaching is not what they signed to do. So they need to know as much information. I want to encourage you all to track progress. What I mean by that is, in this digital world right now during this pandemic, sometimes teachers are giving out more work than they usually do. So that was the lesson that we learned as parents of 4 children during this pandemic. Was my child was getting essentially almost 11 hours of work per day, but in a school setting, he's only in class about 7.5, 8 hours. And so that was a challenge. And so we had to start tracking that and seeing this is more than we usually do. And I'll explain why you're tracking progress in a second. I want to encourage you to encourage breaks for your students, for your scholars. Encourage them to have breaks and do it consistently. If your student is doing work for more than 40 minutes, then I want you to encourage them to take a break. Encourage them to do something that doesn't relate to that, because the research shows after about 45 minutes, kids usually check out. It's true in college settings, and it's true of adults as well. So make sure you're giving them breaks. Giving them a chance to do something that doesn't have to do with the schoolwork, and make them consistently. For my oldest, who's in middle school, we told him after about 45 minutes, I need you to take a break. I need you to take about a 10, 15-minute break. Because I didn't want his whole day to be screen time, screen time, screen time. And that leads to the next part about being an ally for the students, is offering feedback to the teachers. Sometimes teachers think they're not giving out enough work, and giving that feedback of, hey, listen, my student was doing this work for 6, 7 hours, and they're nowhere close to being done. Because teachers are looking for that feedback, and they need it, because this is new territory. So sometimes they're going to give out too much, sometimes they're going to give out too little. What I ask is that when you're giving feedback, do it with empathy, knowing that they're trying their best and that this is new territory. And also know that that feedback may not only help your student, but may help other students that that teacher is responsible for. All right. Someone talked about using the Remind app to communicate with my kids' teachers. That's a great tool. That's a great tool to give feedback. If your teacher, if you're in the K-12 setting, if your student has Remind Me, then the Remind app, that's a great way to send messages to teachers. Now, ideally, teachers will have certain times where they are available to talk, and that's one of those things. Someone does not like Remind. Fair enough. You just joined, and so I would say if Remind is not your thing, there are some other things like discussion board forums that you can just subscribe to, encouraging, where you don't have to get the reminders, notifications every day or so, where you can kind of check in once a day. And so those who came in late, we can, I'll share those who register for this. The Alumni Association will send out some resources that I have that kind of share some different ways that you can offer to teachers of your students that may help them, which helps you. So, all right, next slide, please. So what I want to create in this opportunity here is asking for your takeaways. Is there something that I talked about that you thought was helpful, but you want to know more information about? I want to create that opportunity here, and then I'll have a general just Q&A session after this. All right. I'll wait to see if anyone has any things they want me to clarify on. Okay, so with that being said, then let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, and I will leave it towards any questions you have. I've covered some things. Some of you came in later, and that's okay if you have that. If you have a question, I want to make sure I answer those. But I want to make sure that giving you time to be able to ask questions, things that I didn't cover that you wanted me to cover, some things that I covered that you want more clarification on. So I want to go ahead and open that up. Okay, what resource could you email the allied students who need extra assistance? The things that I would talk about as relates to those need additional accommodations is knowing kind of how that works about what your rights are. When sometimes because this pandemic, I've seen schools that have good intentions push back and say, we can't do this, and being aware of what your rights are and understanding that if you have a reasonable accommodation, the school has to support that, especially if you have documentation that supports it, and kind of going through a channel of command of notifying the counselors not giving you what you know, working with the assistant principals, going to the principals, and kind of going through those steps to get what you need. The other thing is making sure that students don't have to feel bad that they need extra help or extra support, and that everyone learns differently, and that parents are aware of those things. Let's see, back to your point about educators are open to digital change, but they still may be lacking confidence or support system. What ideas do you have to help those educators? On those situations, I think it's really important that if you know of someone who might be struggling, to be proactive and reach out to them. You know, that's something that I did. I knew of some colleagues that I knew were struggling with some things, and so I reached out to them. I think that's really important. I think it's important that it's an environment that the school district puts out where maybe if you know how to help with something, you put out there, hey, I know some resources. Here are some resources that people can look into. So for those who know how to do stuff, it's being proactive and reaching out to others that is truly helpful. I really like the idea of a frequently asked question page. Our schools use Canvas. What would be the best way to do this? Canvas, similar to Blackboard, is creating a discussion board forum and calling it frequently asked questions. And that's where students can ask their questions about general things about the class or assignments, things like that. And that's where you as the instructor can respond back to it. Let's see. What are some of the options a teacher can do to help students who do not have high-speed internet? Great question. I know everyone is not a fan of giving out their cell phone numbers. I am not as well. And so this is where if they don't have high speed, I give students my Google Voice number. My Google Voice number is not my cell phone number, but it goes to my cell phone. And what it allows to do for those students who don't have high-speed internet, they can call and it will go to my digital Google Voice, and I can respond and talk to them like it's a real conversation. And so that may be a way to be able to engage with students who don't have high-speed internet. What does your tracking your progress look like at the grad school level? What kind of leverage does that provide to the student? So when you're talking about tracking, so I was talking about tracking as it relates to supporting your student. So on the grad school level, that's a different monster. Your grad school work is your grad school work, and typically it's important during this pandemic is to get as much as you can ahead of time, ask for rubrics, ask for feedback, and be proactive, because many grad school programs aren't going to be super flexible about how they do things. And typically you're going to get that in the undergraduate program, but if you're proactive enough, you can get some flexibility. Let's see. I also suggest breaks to my kids and to my grandkids. I try to call and encourage them each week. When I see sites that might support them, I forward to the parents. I think that's a great idea. I think if you can share information, that's great. I think try to share it in increments. If you share too much, it can be overwhelming, and the person that you're sharing with may not say it's overwhelming, but they may be feeling that. There are YouTube videos devoted to online learning in the age of COVID. Would you like one? I think YouTube videos can be great. Try to find the shorter YouTube videos, some that are under 10 minutes. When you start getting to those 30, 40-minute YouTube videos trying to show students things, it's easy for a kid to check out. Rubrics, should they be aimed at the parents or the students I think when you're making rubrics in the K-12 setting, it should be geared toward the student. So when you make rubrics, they should be simplistic. Even when I teach graduate school courses, my rubrics are simplistic. I'm asking for things, but I'm very clear about what I'm asking for. And so I think when it relates to rubrics, it's really important that you make sure that you're clear about word count, about grammar, about citations, about formatting. And so if you're doing that and you're clear, and it's at a, elementary school level about your explanation, you're less likely to have students get confused by it. You're talking about, my son had a project and the teacher did a great job of the rubric. She said what had to be on the first page, what had to be on the back page, how many pictures had to be there. Very clear details. And I think that's really important. Alex, thank you for sharing the YouTube video. Appreciate that. All right, and for sharing on special needs. All right, we have a CPC Cal Poly student who's a STEM major. Of course, they're upper level and require more study time. As a parent of a second grader, that's tough. I do not have the same time as before. Do you know of any student study resources, short amount of time? So when you have a little person, I get that's tough because your priority is probably your student. It's probably your own student while you're trying to be a student. And I know STEM requirements at Cal Poly, I imagine they've only gotten more intense. So I get how that can be a stressor. What I would say is, if you can, I would encourage you to go on to, if you Google BARC questionnaire, if you've never taken that before, kind of take that, and what it will give you is your preferred learning style. And with that preferred learning style, it will give you some best practices on what you can do to learn and study. Ideally, if you can learn things in multiple ways, you're liable to hold on in a richer way. And so some things that I used to do is I would include my children in teaching things. My thought was, if I can explain it to my kid, then I truly got it. And so that's something you can use, even with some of the STEM stuff you're doing, trying to give them information, explain to your second grader, some of the concepts you have to master may be a good way. And that shows that, one, that you truly know it, and you made it user-friendly to your second grader. But checking out the BARC questionnaire, if you Google that, that's a great tool to kind of tell you about how you prefer to learn things. And so by using that, you're more likely to be able to be more efficient in your studying, opposed to just rehearsing things over and over again. While that works, it's not necessarily efficient. And Paul shared, that's a good step to understand your own, putting your resources, best practices. So again, as a mom, as a dad, when you're a student yourself, that's tough. And so for me, I try to find ways to include my kids when possible. It's not always possible. When I can, try to include them. What is the name of the questionnaire? It's called the BARC questionnaire. and I put it in the group, in the chat, the BART questionnaire, and takes you about 15 minutes or so. And once you've gone through it, if there are things that don't make sense or you have questions about, feel free to reach out. One of the things I've done in the past is I've worked with tutoring centers, and we're using BARC as a way to help people step up their mastery to be more efficient. I ran a tutoring program at a chiropractic school, and the chiropractic program, they're in class from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it's not a lot of study time. And so we work through and finding efficient ways for them to be able to digest and actually understand what they had to learn. So hopefully that will be helpful for you. And if you need more suggestions, I'll be happy to suggest those for you. All right. Any other questions? Great questions you all have had thus far, so I appreciate it. And Ashford, did I answer your question the way you want to? I think I got what you were saying. Did I answer your question about the grad school? Awesome. There is a student club for parents. So I would definitely encourage you to touch base with that. First year college students are going to find the transition rough. And that's why it's going to be important. A lot of college students are going to be starting classes in the next couple of weeks to look up the student services that are available at your campus in advance. That way you know about them before you get there. And you can reach out before you get there. All you gotta do is get a hold of one student services department. Most student services, different departments within a college or university talk to each other. And so once you call one, they can give you additional resources. So I would encourage, if you're going to college, if you're in college and you're not aware of the student services that are available to you, now is the time to reach out to the student services and see what's out there. All right. All right. What other questions do you all have or things you'd like me to clarify? And let me ask, would it be easier for some people to be able to speak it versus typing? I know everyone's not necessarily a typer. Would that help that someone will be able to ask the question audibly? All right, so we're asking Ms. Love to provide some information other than Google Voice, or is Microsoft Teams a platform where students can reach out to their instructors? Yes. A lot of schools are transitioning. I know Zoom is, for some people, not necessarily an option they can pursue anymore. But yes, Microsoft Teams is another platform. Google Hangouts is another way where students are able to communicate with their instructors. The Remind app is another way. Google Voice, the cool thing about Google Voice is not only can they call you, they can also send text messages. So what I get during the semester is I'll have students text me versus emailing me, and I respond back to them just like it was an email. So Google Voice allows you to call and text, which I think is a great feature. Microsoft Teams is a great feature. I think for if you are an educator using Microsoft Teams, I would encourage you to get used to it first because it is different. And so you want to kind of play with it ahead of time, but that's also a great tool to utilize to be able to communicate with students to reach out for support. And something that I try to do is set times throughout the week, 2 hours, 2 different days a week, where students can reach me in real time and call or text or do video chat. Let's see. I predict internet capacity will be taxed when school begins. Yes, internet will be a challenge. And so that's one of the reasons why I utilize Google Voice to allow students to text me or to call me so that they're not relying solely on the computer or a laptop or Chromebook to reach out. How do you navigate and encourage students' engagement online, especially when students choose to have their video and audio off during the sessions for various reasons? Great question. So in the college setting, I have discussion board forums. And that allows people, and I give them a week, about 2 weeks to respond and engage with their peers, and they have to respond to so many peers in that particular discussion board. When it comes to video chats in K-12, some things that I have seen my students' teachers utilize is, even when the students' videos and audio is off, they are asked to use the video, the chat, kind of like we're doing right now. So even if they are not in there, they are asked to respond, to put so many chats in during the call. And that's a way to engage the students so that they are part of what's going on. Any advice on how to use Excel for assignments for students that do not have a laptop or a computer? Well, that's a two-part thing. If we're talking about how to support students using their cell phone, it has to make sure that the instructors have it set up to where assignments can be done. So at my college, we typically have a proctoring system, and we've been asked to switch that up because students were trying to do their work from their cell phone. And so that's one thing that we try to push out. If they are a college student, typically a lot of colleges will offer loaner programs, and a lot of students just aren't aware of it. And so making sure students are aware of those loaner programs. If they don't have access to that, then it's making mention that finding out, depending on where they live, some libraries will still be open and give students access to computers. And so it's going to depend on where they are, what district they're in, on what they can utilize, because they can do a lot of things from their phone, but they're still won't be able to do everything from their phone. So making sure that they're aware of resources either through their college, their K-12 school, or the local library, local city libraries that are available to them is really important. Teams is more for older students. Google is very simple. Yes, Teams is, I won't say for older students, because I've had some older students that struggle with Teams as well. Google is a little more simpler, but I also think that Google has been around longer. Teams is fairly new. I know they're trying to get people to utilize Teams more. Okay, so Sarah's been giving some information from Cheryl Love on how to utilize some of the information that we're talking about. Okay. Are you familiar with Google Class? Yes, I am familiar with Google Classrooms. What question do you have about Google Classrooms? It's user-friendly more than Seesaw when the instructor knows how to use Google Classroom. One of the things that's important on the educator side, if possible, is trying not to have multiple platforms. I understand that oftentimes in the K-12 setting, your district is giving you different initiatives that you need to adhere to. The challenge with that is it's hard to keep up with all different passwords. So ideally, if you can minimize the platforms to ones that you really know really well and stick it to that, that's ideal. I like Google Classrooms better than Seesaw, but then again, I'm also more familiar with Google Classrooms than Seesaw. And so I think that's the trade-off. I think when instructors don't know what to do, that makes it a little more tough. Alex is saying Google Classroom is way more friendly. And again, I think Seesaw can be, but again, that requires on the educator side that the educator provides resources at the beginning of the term. If that's not provided, then Seesaw is going to be very frustrating because there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to learn. For Google Classroom, it is more user-friendly, meaning that if the teacher does not provide you information, you can still navigate and figure it out a lot easier than Seesaw. Great question. All right. What other questions do you have? All right. And yes, I believe Seesaw is not fun. And the question you may want to gently ask, because I know it's probably schools just starting up, is, excuse me, is the teacher open to the idea, excuse me, of using Google Classroom? That may be something that they may not have thought of. And you might want to get feedback about why it's challenging. Don't just say it's not fun. Say, hey, be specific about these are some of the challenges that we're having, because again, teachers don't know what they don't know about your child's experience unless you tell them. Yes, Google Classroom is more intuitive. That's how they designed it. That is one of the one of the things. And there are other intuitive programs as well. I think a lot of people are familiar with Google, so that helps Google do their thing a little bit easier. All right. So yeah, for that seesaw, I would encourage you, like, to just give that, give that feedback of some of the challenges you all are having and ask them what their best practices are. If they don't have any, then that may mean that that platform is something they're exploring with as well. And so they may need to consider some other options. And by giving them feedback early, they may not only just help your student, your 6-year-old, but all the other 6-year-olds. All right. What other questions do you all have? You're welcome. Any other questions that y'all have? I want to make sure that I answer them. So I'm going to keep the chat going. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide, which is the final slide, we'll keep the chat going. This has my contact information. That is my email. That is my Google Voice number. Reach out, and at the end of this, we're going to collect all everyone's information, and I'm going to send you all some digital resources for you all to check out that can help you out. And you also have my contact information here. So I want to let you know the conversation doesn't have to stop here. If there are questions you have as an educator, as a student, as anywhere else, then I want to encourage you to do that. No, you can't post on your Facebook page. But if you have a question, then you can feel free to reach out. All right. All right. So, but I want to make sure that you have that information, and that again, if you have questions, they don't stop here. But again, the focus is to be able to support you all and what you all are doing. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. So again, let's see. Thank you so much for. Okay, great. Good. Glad it was helpful. And again, for those who have questions about accommodations for those who have disabilities or any type of special needs, feel free to reach out to me, and we can touch base and try to schedule a time. And I can offer you some suggestions on how to go forward so that you or whoever you're supporting has what they need. Because I think that is, during this pandemic, is really critical, because that is a underserved population often in times of crisis, and the pandemic definitely qualifies as a crisis. All right. All right, well, if you all have any other questions, I will be on until 6:30 your time. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. If not, thank you all for coming today. I hope that you all got something useful from this presentation. And if there's more questions that you have that come up afterwards, feel free to reach out. Thank you, Corey. So we will be having another event. For those who are educators, we'll be having another event on Wednesday, August 26th, to be talking about the idea of how do you make learning more student-centered and more culturally relevant to a diverse population of students. You can still do it and meet the state guidelines or federal guidelines of things that you have to cover. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, something that I used was hip hop, because hip hop was a medium to connect with a lot of students from various backgrounds. And we use hip hop to master what they had to master for standardized purposes, like state exams and things like that. So that's on August 26th. You can go ahead and sign up on the link that's on the group chat. And I will be presenting that and encouraging you all some best practice that can work, whether you are working in the K-12, whether you're working in pre-K, or whether you're working in the college setting. All right, you're welcome. Glad the information was useful. All right. Well, again, one of the things we want to talk about, the 3 things that we said we was going to do, is we're going to cover strategies for educators to communicate with students. We did that. some self-advocating strategies, we did that, and applying strategies for teaching and learning, we did that. So I'm glad you all got something useful from today. I'm glad you were all able to be here and appreciate that. And thank you all. And I think Corey, are you closing us out?
Mute. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you. It was a great webinar. I learned a lot. Everyone learned a lot. Everyone, thank you for participating in today's event. We want to definitely repeat again. We want to have you guys come out on Wednesday, August 26th. Professor Hurd will be discussing student one-on-one, so centered learning, student one-on-one. So we definitely want you guys to participate in that. We'll also be having the African American Museum of Beginnings representatives there as well. So we'll just be talking more about diversifying the curriculum for students. So thank you again, everyone. Be safe during these times, and we appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess any more questions? Corey, sign us off. Does anyone have any outstanding questions? Want to make sure you get that before you leave. Okay. All right, Anna, I think we're done then.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Elgrie. I learned a lot.
Well, hopefully it will help with your household.
I need all the help I can get.
Awesome. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Noel. Appreciate that. So I will touch base with all the Alumni Association crew later on. I'll send you all an email. Thank you all for having me. And for those who are still on the call, I will see you all later. Please be safe.
Have a great night. Thank you.